Good evening. It is my great honor to welcome all of you to Ohio Wesleyan and to Great Chapel for this very special occasion that includes the conferring of an honorary degree, the highest recognition offered by this university, the conferring of the degree to Congressman John Lewis, and then a lecture by Congressman Lewis to be followed by a time for question and answers. And then following the lecture, he will be available to sign books just outside of the chapel. We are thrilled to have all of you here this evening. I especially want to recognize Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who is here. Congresswoman, I know she was coming this way. She may not have made it into the hall. We'll recognize her when she arrives. We'll begin with an introduction of the life and work of Congressman Lewis that will be presented by Professor Michael Flam, a professor of history in the Department of History at Ohio Wesleyan. And then as we move to the conferring of the honorary degree, we will hear from Dr. Myron McCoy, who is a member of the Ohio Wesleyan Board of Trustees. And then we will move to the conferring of the degrees. Then we'll have a brief pause while we step out and allow Congressman Lewis to remove the weight of the academic gown prior to addressing you. Dr. Flam.
In just a moment, you'll see what we want you to see. Good evening. I am Professor Michael Flam of the History Department, and tonight it is my great honor and privilege to introduce a personal hero and inspiration, Congressman John Lewis, who was on the front lines of virtually every struggle for racial justice in the 1960s, and he has been waging the good fight ever since. His story is literally history, and we as a nation need to remember it, perhaps now more than ever. As Congressman Lewis so eloquently put it in his powerful memoir, Walking with the Wind, which I strongly recommend, know your history. Study it, share it, shed a tear over it, laugh about it, live it, act it out, understand it, because for better or worse, our past is what brought us here, and it can help lead us to where we need to go. I therefore hope that you will indulge me as I spend a few minutes highlighting an extraordinary life, rooted in faith, and built on conscience, courage, and conviction. John Lewis was born in 1940 in rural Alabama, raised on a small cotton farm in the heart of the segregated South. At the age of 16, he engaged in his first public act of civil disobedience. When he was not permitted to check out a book from the local public library, he started a petition drive. It failed, but it did not discourage him. He then became the first member of his family to go to college when he enrolled at the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. In 1960, at the age of 20, John Lewis participated in the sit-ins at Nashville, even though he rarely had enough money in his pocket to pay for a meal if he had been served. He was among a brave band of college students, mostly black, some white, who decided to confront the institution of segregation directly and peacefully. By acting on the courage of their convictions, by sitting down at the lunch counters of Nashville, they stood up for the principles at the heart of the American experience: equal rights and equal justice for all, even if for centuries those principles were too often ignored or subverted in the name of Jim Crow and white supremacy. Lewis also went to jail for the first time, And he learned that the essence of nonviolence is the capacity to forgive. When you can truly understand and feel, he writes, even as a person is cursing you to your face, even as he is spitting on you, or pushing a lit cigarette into your neck, or beating you with a truncheon, if you can feel that your attacker is as much a victim as you are, that he is a victim of the forces that have shaped and fed the anger and fury, then you are well on your way to the non-violent life. In 1961, John Lewis was one of the 13 original freedom riders who sought to protest segregation in interstate travel and facilities. In Montgomery, John Lewis was beaten unconscious by a white mob and then, while lying in a pool of his own blood, was served an injunction and again arrested. Over the course of his career, Lewis has been physically attacked and arrested more than 40 times. By 1963, at the age of 23, he was an important civil rights leader, one of the Big Six, and he was chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was at the forefront of grassroots organizing and voter registration in the South. By then, he also shared the frustration and anger many in SNCC felt at the fierce resistance the movement faced and the slow progress it had made. As the youngest speaker at the March on Washington, Lewis hoped to deliver a forceful speech to compel Congress to pass the Civil Rights Bill introduced by President Kennedy. Lewis wanted to utter these words: "We will march through the South, through the heart of Dixie, the way Sherman did. We shall pursue our own scorched earth policy and burn Jim Crow to the ground, nonviolently." Instead, John Lewis compromised by offering these words:
Those who have said be patient and wait, we must say that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now. We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We're tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And then you holler, be patient. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we want it now. We do not want to go to jail, but we will go to jail if this is the price we must pay for love, brotherhood, and true peace. I appeal to all of you to get in this great revolution that is sweeping this nation. Get in and stay in the streets of every city, every village and hamlet of this nation until true freedom comes, until the revolution of 1776 is complete. We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution. For in the Delta of Mississippi, in Southwest Georgia, in the Black Belt of Alabama, in Harlem, in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and all over this nation, the black masses are on the march for jobs and freedom. They're talking about slow down and stop. We will not stop. All of the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman will not stop this revolution. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. By the forces of our demand, our determination, and our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South, into 1,000 pieces and put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
Today, John Lewis is the sole surviving speaker from that shining moment at the Lincoln Memorial, when Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech was imprinted on the national consciousness. In 1964, 50 years ago this June, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and President Johnson signed it into law. On that day, John Lewis was at a segregated playground in Greenwood, Mississippi, keeping his eyes on the prize and working to make Freedom Summer a reality for all. The freedom struggle continued in 1965. In Selma, Alabama, John Lewis and 600 other courageous souls tried to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge without a permit. Awaiting them on Bloody Sunday were state troopers armed with nightsticks, tear gas, and homemade whips. One officer had a rubber hose wrapped with barbed wire. Without warning, the troopers attacked and beat them. Lewis received a fractured skull. In the outrage that followed, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, and Lewis was present in the White House when President Johnson signed it into law. In his memoir, Lewis recalls the moment with mixed feelings. That day was a culmination, a climax, the end of a very long road. In a sense, it represented a high point in modern America, probably the nation's finest hour in terms of civil rights. But it was certainly the last act for the movement as I knew it. Something was born in Selma during the course of that year, but something died there too. The road of nonviolence had essentially run out. Selma was the last act. It was time for Lewis to leave SNCC, but at the age of 25, his commitment to nonviolence and the cause of racial equality remained as strong as ever. In the following years, he worked as a community organizer for the Field Foundation. He earned his degree in philosophy from Fisk University, and he headed the Voter Education Project. Then, in 1977, he joined Action, the federal agency that oversaw volunteer programs such as the Peace Corps and VISTA. The invitation to join Action came at the insistence of Assistant Director Mary King, an Ohio Wesleyan alum who had worked in SNCC. 3 years later, Lewis returned to Atlanta. And in 1986, he was elected to the House of Representatives, where he has served ever since and become known as the conscience of the Congress. In 2010, Lewis was awarded the highest honor a civilian can receive, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In a moment, Congressman Lewis will be presented with an honorary degree. But before I conclude my remarks, I want to share a final thought from his inspiring memoir. There is an old African proverb, when you pray, move your feet. As a nation, if we care for the beloved community, we must move our feet, our hands, our hearts, our resources to build and not to tear down, to reconcile and not to divide, to love and not to hate, to heal and not to kill. In the final analysis, we are one people, one family, one house, the American house, the American family. No one has done more in our lifetime to make that vision a reality than Congressman John Lewis. He is a true American hero, a living legend, a man who has been putting his life on the line and getting into good trouble for more than 50 years. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce the Reverend Myron McCoy, Ohio Wesleyan class of 1977, and senior pastor of the First United Methodist Church at the Chicago Temple, who has some reflections to share.
Good evening. What an honor it is to represent the Ohio Wesleyan University Board of Trustees here this evening, and to welcome and briefly share the stage of beautiful Gray Chapel with a man I admire greatly. Sir Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Congressman John Lewis is such a giant. Permit me a personal for a moment as I look back on all the doors that have been open for me throughout my lifetime. It's because I was given a boost by leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. We don't want to leave the sisters out. I've been pulled up by leaders like Dorothy Height and Whitney Young. And I climbed on the shoulders of leaders like Ella Baker and John Lewis. And you know something? This man's shoulders are massive. Indeed, all of us in the United States and those who have sought liberation from oppressive governments from around the world have climbed up onto the shoulders of Congressman Lewis and other courageous pioneers like him. When one seriously takes stock, it is hard to fathom how far we've climbed across the globe in the last 50 years. Earlier this month, John Lewis once again led a march across the historic Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, marking the 49th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in 1965, when thousands of peaceful protesters, including John Lewis, were beaten, gassed, run over by horses by the Alabama authorities. And what a blessing it is for us to have climbed up out of such a world. And we're continuing to climb because people with great moral conviction and persuasion like Congressman John Lewis. Yes, as I've often heard this conscience of the Congress say, we have all come a long way, but there is still more work to do to build a more just and peaceful world. And as a graduate, as a trustee of this great university, I encourage you, the students of Ohio Wesleyan, to climb up on the shoulders of all worthy leaders today and those in the past. Stretch your vision as far as you can. Never give up the desire to create a better country, a better world. And then make your own shoulders available for the generations that will follow you. Thank you, and God bless you.
And now I will ask Dr. McCoy to escort Congressman Lewis for the presentation of the degree. John Lewis, human rights visionary, champion of the principle of nonviolence as the most powerful force for social transformation and the dignity of every human being, and a force to be reckoned with on the floors of Congress for close to 3 decades. You have devoted your life to the belief that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As a United States Representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District, you give hope to those who face human and civil rights obstacles while reminding us that these struggles and their solutions are bigger than one law, one vote, or one judicial system. You learned early in your life the harsh realities of a segregated society where all people were not treated as if they were created equal. But at home, your extended family and neighbors taught you the lessons of love that gave you a vision for beloved community, a vision you would never forsake. By radio, you first listened to the inspiring words of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. As a college student in Nashville, you learned the philosophy and adopted the discipline of nonviolence. For nearly a decade, you stood, sat, marched, and rode on the front lines of the civil rights movement. As a defining leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, you brought to life the Freedom Rides and helped orchestrate the single greatest social transformation in the history of this country. Never compromising your commitment to nonviolence, you endured abuse, suffered injuries too numerous to count, and spent unending days and nights in jail for nothing more than exercising your constitutional rights. Spearheading one of the most pivotal moments of the civil rights movement, you helped lead orderly protesters over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama in 1965 to demonstrate the need for voting rights. But you were met by brutal attackers and media attention as well. During that same year, the Voting Rights Act was passed. Your leadership extended to championing the cause of all people who live in poverty or without appropriate educational opportunity, regardless of race. And your commitment to nonviolence led you to confront the nation's engagement in Vietnam. From organizing voter registration drives and marches in the mid-1960s, to years later turning your sights on ethics in government and neighborhood preservation as an Atlanta City Council member, you were destined to take your leadership talents and courage to the nation's capital as a member of Congress. Called by many the conscience of the U.S. Congress, you continue to envision a beloved community, described as an all-inclusive, truly interracial and just democracy that respects the dignity and worth of every human being. Your dedication to protecting and securing human rights and civil liberties makes that community stronger every day, and make you an exemplar of the highest aspirations and most cherished values of this country as well as this university. And so it is in recognition of your significant contributions to protect and secure human rights and civil liberties, of your ongoing record of accomplishment as a public service, and for taking us ever closer to your beloved community, that by the authority vested in me by the Ohio Wesleyan University Board of Trustees, I hereby confer upon you the honorary degree Doctor of Laws, with all the rights, honors, and privileges pertaining thereto, and cause you to be so hooded and presented with this diploma. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman John Lewis.
Mr. President, members of the Board of Trustees, distinguished faculty and alumni, parents, family, and friends, thank you so much for this great honor. I'm delighted to be here tonight, to be receiving this honor, and I accept this honor on behalf of countless individuals. On behalf of those who stood in unmovable lines, those that participated in the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, the marches, on behalf of those who never gave up or gave in, who kept the faith and kept their eyes on the prize. I feel more than lucky, but honored and blessed to be standing here tonight in this beautiful chapel on this campus of Howard Wesleyan University. Now, you heard that I didn't grow up in a big city. No, I didn't. I didn't grow up in a big city like Cleveland, Cincinnati, Dayton, or Delaware. I grew up in rural Alabama, about 50 miles from Montgomery. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, how many of you remember when you were 4? What happened to the rest of us? Well, in 1944, when I was only 4 years old, my father had saved $300. And with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still owns that land today. On this farm, we raise a lot of cotton, corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. If any of you have an opportunity to visit my office on Capitol Hill, or my office in downtown Atlanta, the moment you walk through the door, the first thing that staff will offer you will be some peanuts. Because the State of Georgia Peanut Commission provide all members of the Georgia Congressional Delegation with an adequate supply of peanuts. I don't eat too many of those peanuts, and don't tell the people in Georgia I don't. I ate so many peanuts when I was growing up, I just don't want to see any more peanuts. Sometime I get on a flight, flying from Atlanta to Washington, or Washington back to Atlanta, and the flight attendant tried to give me some peanuts. I said, no, thank you. Now, you heard me say we raise a lot of chickens. I know here on this campus, in this city, Delaware, and all around this state, in our nation, some of you know about raising chickens, right? You really do? Yes. You know about Popeyes, Bojangles, Kentucky Fried, Churches, but you really don't know anything about raising chickens. Some of you can raise a lot of fuss. Some of you can bring about a lot of drama, but you don't know anything about raising chickens. Let me tell you what I had to do, my brothers and sisters, when I was growing up. It was my responsibility to care for the chickens. I had to take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. Some of you may be asking or raising the question, now, John Lewis, why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest, and there would be some more eggs. Had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. Do you follow me? You don't follow me, it's okay. It's all right. So when these little chicks will hatch, I would fool these setting hens. I would cheat on these setting hens. I would take these little chicks and put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own, get some more fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, because the setting hen is still in the nest for another 3 weeks. I just get a little chicks to another hen. I kept on fooling and cheating on these setting hens. And when I look back on it, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most democratic thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. But I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive incubator or hatcher from the Sizzle Roebuck store. Any of you old enough to remember the Sizzle Roebuck catalog? Don't fool me. Don't try me. That big book, that heavy book, some people call it the ordering book. Some people call it the wish book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. Well, I just kept on wishing. President Jones, as a young child, about 8 or 9 years old, I became very good at raising chickens. But at a young age, I wanted to be a minister. So from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like together here in the chapel. And we would have church. My brothers and sisters and cousins and the chicken would help make up the audience, the congregation. I would start speaking or preaching, and when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. As a matter of fact, some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Well, that's enough of that. When we would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting. Or to go downtown on a Saturday afternoon to see a movie. All of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. And all the little white children downstairs on the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents why. And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. I heard about Rosa Parks. I followed the drummer of the Montgomery bus boycott. I was deeply moved and inspired. And I find a way to get in the way, a way to get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. When I finished high school in May of 1957, 17 years old, I wanted to attend a little college only 10 miles from my home, Troy State College, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the college. So young people, you know what I did? At the age of 17, I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I told him I needed his help. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I'd been accepted at a little college in Nashville, American Baptist Theological Seminary, now called American Baptist College. I applied, I was accepted. An uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had. Gave me a Foot Locker, one of these upright trunks. I put my clothing, my books, I put everything I own in that Foot Locker, except those chickens. And went off to Nashville to school. And I was in Nashville for a few weeks, told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Martin Luther King Jr. This teacher knew Dr. King. They had studied together at Morehouse College in Atlanta. And it was there that he informed Dr. King, this teacher did, that I was in Nashville. Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So on a Saturday morning in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, my father drove me to the Greyhound bus station in this old broken down pickup truck. Boarded the bus. I traveled to Nashville, to Montgomery rather. And it was in Montgomery that a young lawyer who also was a minister by the name of Fred Gray, who was the lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, the Montgomery movement, he became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and the march from Selma to Montgomery. Met me and drove me to the First Baptist Church, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King, and ushered me into the office of the church. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King spoke up and said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." Gave my whole name. And he started calling me the boy from Troy. I continued to study in Nashville. My parents, my mother and father were so afraid. They didn't want to file a suit against the state of Alabama, against Troy State University. They thought we would lose the land, home would be bombed or burned. So somehow, in some way, maybe it was the spirit of history that kept me in Nashville. Because it was in Nashville, I came in contact with a young man by the name of James Lawson, who taught us the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. He taught us all about Gandhi, what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. He taught us all about the role in civil disobedience. He taught us about the great religions of the world. Taught us about passive resistance. And we had test sit-ins, and we started sitting in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion. Be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served, writing a paper, reading a book, or just looking straight ahead, and someone would come up and spit on you, or put a lighted cigarette out in your hair, or down your back, or call you different names. We didn't strike back. We didn't become bitter. We didn't become hostile. A group of us were arrested. The first mass arrest occurred in Nashville in the sit-in movement on February 27, 1960. 89 of us were arrested. We kept the faith. We kept our eyes on the prize. Because of the sit-ins, the freedom rides, just think, especially young people, students, just think, a few short years ago, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, that black people and white people couldn't board a Greyhound bus, a Trailway bus together, and leave Washington, D.C. to travel through the South. I know it seemed like it was a long time ago, but it was not that long ago. I remember coming to Washington, 21 years old, had all of my hair and a few pounds lighter. Never been to Washington before. 13 of us, African American and white American. May 1st, 1961, for training, orientation. Our first meal was at a Chinese restaurant. Now, growing up in rural Alabama, kindergarten school in Nashville, never had Chinese food before. But during that evening, someone said, "You should eat well, because this may be like the Last Supper." Wonderful meal, wonderful food. On the morning of May 4th, we left Nashville, left Washington, rather. 13 of us, 7 whites and 6 African American. One young African American man attempted to get a shoe shine in a so-called white waiting room that had a so-called white barbershop. He was arrested and taken to jail. He went before a judge the next day. The judge dismissed the charges against him. My seatmate, a young white gentleman, the two of us attempted to desegregate a waiting room in a little town called Rock Hill, South Carolina. We were met by a group of men. We were beaten and left lying in a pool of blood. Several years later, to be exact, almost 50 years later, one of the individuals that beat me came to my office with his son. His son had been encouraging his father to seek out the people that he had wronged. Came February '09, a month after President Obama had been inaugurated. He was so moved. He said, "Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the individuals that beat you on May 9th, 1961. Will you forgive me? I want to apologize. I'm sorry." His son started crying. He started crying. I started crying. The two of them hugged me. I hugged them. And we called each other brothers. That is the power of the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. To be reconciled, to be able to forgive and move on. A few weeks ago, in Montgomery, Alabama, the same church where I met Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy, the same church where many of us were almost killed when people tried to bomb the church the day after the Freedom Ride in Montgomery in May of 1961. When I took a group of members of Congress and others back to the South, the young police chief, who was not even born in 1961, it was not even a dream. He came to the church to welcome us, speaking on behalf of the mayor. He said, "Congressman Lewis, today we have a different police department. So when you came here in 1961, our police department was not kind to you. There were a lot of angry mob to beat you. The people tried to burn you in the church. But we have a different police department today." He said, "Before anyone can become a member of this department, they must know something about Rosa Parks, know something about Martin Luther King Jr., know what happened in Montgomery, what happened in Selma, what happened in Birmingham. We have a different police department today." He said, "In order for me to demonstrate my respect for what you and your colleagues did," he said, "I'm going to take off my badge. This is the chief of police. He said, I'm going to present it to you." I said, "Chief, you can't do that. You're the chief of police." He said, "I can get another one." So when people say nothing has changed, I feel like saying, "Come and walk in my shoes. I will show you change." So those hands that pick cotton, those hands that pull corn and crop tobacco in the heart of the American South, today are helping to elect people to office. Just think a few short years ago, less than 50 years ago, the state of Mississippi had a black voting age population of more than 450,000, and only about 16,000 were registered to vote. One county in Alabama between Selma and Montgomery, Lowndes County, were more than 80% African American. There was not a single registered African American voter in the county. People had to pass a so-called literacy test. On one occasion, a man was asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap. Another occasion, a man was asked to count the number of jelly beans in a jar. People gave a little blood for the right to vote, the right to participate in the democratic process. And I said to you, especially to the young people and to the students tonight, the vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society, and we have to use it. In 1964, my old organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC, organized something called the Mississippi Summer Project. And we recruited more than 1,000 students, ministers, lawyers, priests, rabbis, college professors, and others to come south to work in the Freedom School. The summer night of June 21st, 1964, 3 young men that I knew, that I met, Andy Goodman, Micah Schreiner from New York, and James Shannon from Mississippi, went out to investigate the burning of an African-American church. They were stopped by the sheriff, taken to jail. Later that same evening, they were taken from jail, turned over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. These 3 young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East. They didn't die in Eastern Europe. They didn't die in Africa or Central or South America. They died right here in our own country, trying to get all of our citizens to become participants in the democratic process. Somebody gave a little blood for the right to vote, to help create a truly multiracial, multicultural democratic society. After President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, July 2nd, 1964, he won a landslide election in November 1964. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize in December 64. He come back to Washington from Europe, meet with the President of the United States, and he said to the President, "We need a strong voting rights act." President Johnson said, "Dr. King, I just signed a Civil Rights Act. We don't have the votes in the Congress to get a Civil Rights, a Voting Rights Act passed." He said, "Why don't you make me do it?" So Martin Luther King Jr. and SCLC joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Selma, where we had been since 1962. In Selma, in 1965, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. The only place you could attempt to register was at the courthouse. The only days were the first Monday and the third Mondays of each month. People stood in line day in and day out. A short distance from Selma, in a little town called Marion, Alabama, Perry County, the home county of Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Andrew Young, and Mrs. Rath Abernathy, all from the same county. There was a protest in February 1965. A confrontation occurred. A young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson tried to protect his mother. He was shot in the stomach by a state trooper. And a few days later, he died at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma. Because of what happened to him, we made a decision to march from Selma to Montgomery on March 7, 1965. So March 7, 1965, after church, we conducted a nonviolent workshop in a parking lot. 600 of us lined up in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion. We started walking through the streets of Selma. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. In this backpack, I had 2 books. I thought we were going to be arrested and go to jail. I wanted to have something to read. I had 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to eat, and 1 apple and 1 orange wouldn't last that long. Since we were going to be in jail, I thought I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. Had toothpaste and toothbrush. We started walking slowly across the Pettis Bridge. Down below, we saw all of this water in the Alabama River. Jose William, walking with me, said, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." I said, "What about you, Jose?" He said, "Little." I said, "Well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump." We continued to walk. We came to the highest point on the Pettis Bridge. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. The night before, Sheriff Jim Clark had requested that all white men over the age of 21 to come down to the courthouse and be deputized to become part of his posse to stop the march. We kept walking. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. A man spoke up and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. Will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." And Jose Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And the major said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, bull whips, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. Was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me. I thought it was the last protest. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. I was concerned about the young people, about the women in the line of march. But somehow, in some way, a group of guys apparently carried me back to the Brown Chapel AME Church. Thousands of people on outside trying to get in. The church was full to capacity. And someone asked me to say something, and I stood up and said, "I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote." The next thing I knew, I had been admitted to the Good Samaritan Hospital with 17 other people where we were cared for by a group of nuns. And in a few days, I'm going to travel to Rochester, New York. Most of these nuns are retired, and they live in there, just to go up and say thank you. Thank you for saving us. But because of what happened in Selma, there was demonstration on almost every major college campus in America, at the White House, the Department of Justice, demonstration in more than 80 cities, people demanding that the government act. President Johnson came and spoke before a joint session of Congress 8 days after Bloody Sunday on March 15, 1965, and made one of the most meaningful speeches on for the whole question of civil rights, of voting rights, than any president have made in modern time. He started that speech off that night by saying, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy." He went on to say, "At times, history and fate meet in a single place, in man unending search for freedom." So it was at Appomattox and Lexington. So it was at Concord. And before he concluded that speech, he introduced the Voting Rights Act, condemned the violence in Selma, and near the end of the speech he said, "And we shall overcome." And we shall overcome. The first time an American president used the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement, with Martin Luther King Jr. in the home of a local family in Selma. And I looked at Dr. King. Tears came down his face. We all cried a little. And he said, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the voting rights will be passed. And it was passed by the Congress. And President Johnson signed it into law on August 6, 1965. So we can't go back. We come too far. We made too much progress, but there's still work to be done. I want to say to you tonight, it's up to you. Another generation of young people, and people not so young, must find a way to get in the way, to get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. Now, when I was growing up outside of Troy, Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, I had an aunt by the name of Seneva. And my Aunt Seneva lived in what we call a shotgun house. I know here in this city, in the state of Ohio, you don't even know what I'm talking about. You've never seen a shotgun house. My Aunt Seneva didn't have a green manicured lawn. Had a simple, plain dirt yard. And sometime at night, you can look up through the ceiling, through the holes in the tin roof, and count the stars. When it would rain, she would get a pail, a bucket, or a tub and catch the rainwater. From time to time, she would walk out into the woods and cut branches from a dogwood tree and tie these branches together and make a broom. And she called that broom the brush broom. And she would take that broom and sweep this dirt yard very clean, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week, but especially on Friday or Saturday, because she wanted the dirt yard to look very good on the weekend. For those of you who may not know what a shotgun house is, in a nonviolent sense, it's an old house, one way in, one way out, where you can bounce a basketball through the front door and it will go straight out the back door. She lived in a shotgun house. But one Saturday afternoon, a group of my brothers and sisters and a few of my first cousins were out playing in my Aunt Seneva dirt yard, and an unbelievable storm came up. The wind started blowing, the thunder started rolling, the lightning started flashing, and the rain started beating on the tin roof of this old shotgun house. My aunt became terrified. She started crying. She thought this old house was going to blow away. When one corner of this old house appeared to be lifting, she had us to walk to that corner to try to hold the house down with our bodies. When the other corner appeared to be lifting, she had us to walk to that side. We were little children walking with the wind, but we never left the house. The civil rights movement of the 60s and even the movement speak to us today. We must never, ever leave the house. We must hold our house together. We must hold the American house together. We must hold the world house together. It's not just the house of Ohio, or Georgia, or California, or New York. It's not just the house of America. It's the house of Europe, Africa, Asia, Central and South America, Australia. We all live in the same house. We must learn to live together, as Dr. King said, as brothers and sisters. We must do it. If not, there'll be more violence, more chaos, more conflict. Can we come to that point in keeping with the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence and just be able to say from time to time, excuse me, pardon me, how you feeling today? Can we get along and just be brothers and sisters? It doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. It doesn't matter whether we're Democrats or Republican. It doesn't matter whether we're straight or gay. We are one people, we are one family, we are one house. We all live in the same house. So as I close tonight, be hopeful. Be optimistic. Never, ever become bitter. I got arrested 40 times during the 60s and 5 more times since I've been in Congress. Left bloody, almost died on that bridge at that station in Montgomery. But I don't hate. I'm not bitter. Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. Bitterness will not solve our problems. Reach out. Let's become one family, one community, one house. Thank you very much.
And now Congressman Lewis has graciously agreed to take some comments and some questions from you. I ask you to try to please keep your comments and questions brief so we can get to as many of them as possible in the time that we have. Go ahead.
I find this conversation very uplifting.
Use the microphone, please.
Okay. All right. I was really glad to hear what you said about voting, but then I worry about what just happened with the Voting Rights Act last summer by overturning Section 4 because, I mean, you heard a lot of congressmen and politicians saying things are different now. How do you feel about that?
Well, you should know how I feel. During the hearing on the Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, I was there on the front row, listened to the argument, listened to the question on the part of members of the court. When the decision came down last June, I almost cried, but I wouldn't allow myself to cry. I don't quite understand it. It's something that voting should be so simple. Should be as simple as picking up a glass of water. It's very simple. It doesn't make sense in a democratic society to make it so hard and so difficult for people to participate. We should open up the political process and let people come in, all of the people. And it's not just a Southern thing. It's a national thing. Well, people want to take us back to another period. And young people, students, minority, seniors, college professors, all of us got to say, we're not going back. We made too much progress. I think what drove people to turn out in 2012, people didn't like what people were trying to do. And we'll fix it. We have a piece of legislation pending that has some bipartisan support. I hope we can get it passed before the end of this year, but if not, you have to take the long, hard look. Continue to work. Our struggle is not a struggle that lasts for one day, 1 week, 1 semester, or 1 school year, or 1 election cycle. It is a struggle of a lifetime. We have to give it all we have.
Congressman Lewis. I know about chickens. Let me tell you, I was born 2 blocks from Ohio Wesleyan University, right on South Liberty Street. And my mom's family were farmers in South Charleston, Ohio, and my grandfather on my dad's side was farmed out on Ashley Road, which is US 42, okay? So I know all about that. And I know a little bit about migrant workers. When I was 13 years old, I was a green bean picker, and I called us guys the Liberty Street migrant workers. And what we did, John Brody had a farm on North 23, and he would come down and pick up us guys, and we'd get on the truck and go up and pick beans, green beans, penny a pound, 50 cents, 50 pounds, 20 cents, 20 pounds, and that's the fact. And so I just got a little taste of what a migrant worker, but at that time, 20 cents was a lot of money to us kids, because you know what they always call the South Side in Delaware? Up there. You know what I'm saying? So I've been in the fight since I was 17 for equal, to be equal, right here in Delaware, Ohio. So I know about it, believe me. God bless you. I love you.
What inspired you to become a civil rights leader?
I was deeply inspired by hearing the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on our radio and following Rosa Parks' action. When I was in school, in elementary school, had a wonderful teacher. School was overcrowded, poorly staffed, but I had a wonderful teacher who said, "Read, my child, read." And I tried to read everything, everything. We were so poor, we didn't have a subscription to the local newspaper, but my grandfather had one. And when he would finish reading his newspaper each day, he would pass it on to us. And so by keeping up with current events, listening to the radio, reading the newspaper, hearing the words of Martin Luther King Jr., reading about Rosa Parks, and then when I was 15 years old, in 1955, I heard about what happened to Emmett Till. And seeing everything just sort of, and I said, one day, maybe I will have an opportunity to do something about it. As a young child, I made a field trip when I was in like the 3rd or 4th grade to Tuskegee, my first field trip, and I saw what people were doing, the school that Booker T. Washington built, what George Washington Carver was doing as a scientist. So all these things sort of come together to help shape and mold. When I first met Dr. King, I was sort of frightened to be in his presence. But I got to know him very well, and he became like a big brother.
Did he have dreams of becoming a congressman? Was that something that...
No, the young man you saw, I didn't have a dream. I tell you one thing. I didn't like working in the field. And as a young child, some of you who have probably read Walking with the Wind, some morning I would get up very, very early and get dressed and get my book bag and hide under the porch and wait for the school bus to come along to get the bus and go off to school. I would tell my mother and tell my father, my mother in particular, I said, this is hard work. And she would say, boy, hard work never killed anybody. You know, work in the field? And I said, well, it's about to kill me. So I wanted to get an education. I knew there must be a better way, but I didn't have any dream about becoming a congressperson. Getting to know Robert Kennedy, meeting President Kennedy, going to Washington with Dr. King from time to time, sort of convinced me how being involved in politics can help bring about change.
Hi, Congressman. This is a massive honor for me. I'm actually getting slightly emotional. I get emotional because I'm a senior now. I'm going to be graduating in May. And as an ally of the anti-racist movement, my friends and I, in Student Union of Black Awareness, the House of Black Culture, Black Men of the Future, Sisters United, we have been fighting a serious fight for the last 4 years, and obviously before then, to have our voices heard. And I think sometimes we feel very small. We feel like the administration sometimes doesn't want to hear us. And I was just wondering if you could offer any advice so that we don't get burned out. We don't become hostile, we don't become bitter, because obviously we want to bring about positive change for people in the future. You know, we need more professors of color and all that sort of. So, thank you.
Well, you're on the right road. Don't burn out. Continue to be positive, to be hopeful, to be optimistic, and you continue to negotiate. Never give up on talking, never give up on dialogue. Stay grounded. I said to young people all the time, I said, keep the faith. Just keep it. And just love everybody. There's another word I would use, but I don't want to use it here in the chapel. But Dr. King used to tell us, just love everybody. He said, that's a little something all of us that we need to get out. Just love them. Just love everybody. Love is a better way.
Good evening. I count this an immense honor to meet you. And though I am in my 40s, my mother was part of the Tougaloo protests, and my grandfather, he had civil rights workers in Mississippi, and I've always been proud of that. But as an educator, and I'm from Chicago, how do we get this new generation to even care? They seem so disconnected from what happened during your time period, which is before my birth. But even when we try to educate kids, it seems like to them it's in another world, and it doesn't faze them. So in this example, one of my students mentioned, those are all old people. And so I said, well, who in your generation is going to replace them? Who in your generation is equipped? So what strategies or what other things can people do who want to inspire this new generation of civil rights activists to continue the legacy that you and so many others have spent your lives to build?
Well, thank you for mentioning Tougaloo College. I was on the campus just a few weeks ago when we took our trip to Mississippi. And I know several of the young people that came out of Tougaloo, part of the SNCC and the movement. I think we all have an obligation to teach the very young. In addition to my congressional work, I spent a lot of time with children, with young people, elementary school, middle school, high school. We need to teach even at the college level. People need to know what we did and how we did it. People need to know something about the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, passive resistance. If we don't, if we fail to, all of us, black children, white children, Latinos, Asian American, Native, we all need to know our history. Because the history of our struggle is not just the struggle of Africa. Look, the civil rights movement inspired the women's movement, right? It helped get us out of Vietnam, right? The gay movement, the farm workers movement. So we need to teach and share. So don't be afraid or reluctant to share and teach. We all have stories to tell. We should tell our stories, write about our own experience and the experience of our families and friends.
Oh, how you doing, sir? My name is Shaquille Samuels, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I came all the way down here just to ask you, what was it like to go through the racial stigma that you went through in your day, and how could us as a people, not only black people, white people, everyone, come together and maybe fix our problem that we have today? Like, just to go off what she said.
Oh, you know, I grew up in a religious family, and I think my faith played a major role. People call your names. I saw the signs. I wanted to do something about it, and I guess today I would call it faith that somehow, in some way, I'm going to help make it right. So call me anything you want to call me. Throw me in jail, beat me, leave me dead, half dead. Or I'm going to survive. I'm going to make it. I'm going to overcome. When we went on the freedom ride, some of us signed our will. We didn't know whether we would return or not. But we felt something was so right, so necessary, that somebody had to do it. I'm not suggesting to go out and get arrested in a nonviolent protest, but if you believe in something that is so right, so necessary, stand up for it, speak up, speak out. So words, I think so many of us today, we get angry a little too fast and too quick. Just be human and get others to be human. Get our institutions, our companies and business to be human. The way of love is a better way. Just to respect your fellow human beings. Have an executive session with yourself. Just don't talk back to yourself. Just say, I'm not going to become bitter, I'm not going to become hostile, and just go. Go for it.
As one in my 80s, I've been able to watch the evolution of the civil rights movement. Its glory days that you were so much a part of, but I've seen what seems to be an erosion of that progress because of a new, subtle, insidious, subversive kind of racism. How do we go about unmasking that so that the world can see the evil that's behind some of the things that are taking place today?
Well, I think it's important for all of us to speak up, speak out, and you see something that is not right, try to do something about it. And one of the problems, I think, in America today, it's not so much fear, but we're afraid that we may be getting out of line. Maybe it's not the thing to do. But if you see people being put down because of race, nationality, because of religion, sexual orientation, or whatever, gender, whatever. See, I don't think there's any room in American society for discrimination. All right. So, you know, I don't accept this idea, and some people probably disagree, that we're living in a post-racial society simply because we have elected a person of color as president. We are not there yet. But when you have a member of Congress during a joint session of the Congress can say to the president, "You lie." When you have a governor in a certain state meet the president at the airport and wave her finger in his face, if you don't like the man, respect the position. That's all the time. We got to respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. We have to say that. We're not there. We got to continue to work and work. But we'll make it. We will get there. We will create the beloved community. We will create a truly multiracial, multicultural, democratic society in America. That's what I have to say.
We're going to have time for one more question, but I want to let you know that after that question, there will be a reception and a book signing in the lobby just outside the chapel, and so you'll have a chance as well to come up and speak to Congressman Lewis as well. But this will be our final question.
Okay, thank you. There's considerable discussion and comment today around the whole issue of economic inequality. And part of the knowing of one's history, I'd like for you to maybe just talk a little about what I don't hear enough about, and that is when Dr. King was organizing and mobilizing people for a Poor People's Campaign. I hear very little comment and talk about that effort, the goals of that campaign, and how it unfolded. But this discussion around economic inequality is one that he was very concerned about and lost his life organizing and mobilizing around that whole question. So if you could talk a little about the Poor People's Campaign, that's a history that needs to be told also.
I think what you're stating is so important. The last time I saw Martin Luther King Jr. alive was in Atlanta, March of 1968. We had brought together low-income whites, African Americans, Native American, Latinos, Asian American, and he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign to go to Washington. And long before Dr. King spoke about the Poor People's Campaign, A. Philip Randolph had something called the Freedom Budget. He was talking about billions of dollars being made available to rebuild communities and neighborhoods. There are members of Congress, the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, a number of liberal progressive members, white, Asian American, and others on our side of the aisle that continue. We don't have the votes. We don't have the votes to pass an agenda. We're the minority. People tend not to turn out and vote during the off-year midterm election. So if we want to see people put on the American agenda the whole question of economic inequality, then we got to vote. Then you'll be able to say to your representatives, to your senators, that's what we want, that's what we need. These are the 1, 2, 3s, these are the ABCs. If we don't vote, we don't count. Thank you.